Texas Panhandle. 1883. 4 people never walked out of the burning house. The 5th came back too late. She stood in the wall of fire, an iron key clenched in her fist, and watched everything she loved turn to ash. That night, the federal office struck her name from every record. They wrote a single word: deceased. 12 years later, a wagon rolls to a stop outside a small town by the river. The boards beneath her boots groan. Not from age, but from weight. A woman in black steps down. She doesn't ask for directions. She doesn't look at the church. Doesn't look at the saloon. Her hand drifts to her hip, where a gun waits, then falls away. She walks straight ahead, like she's memorized every exit of a place she's never set foot in. On the porch, the sheriff rises too fast. 17 years of reading people, and a chill runs down his spine, because this woman doesn't walk like someone arriving. She walks like someone come back to dig something up, and beneath the land she just bought with cash lies something powerful enough to bury the 6 most powerful men in the territory. She stepped down from the wagon, and the boards groaned beneath her boots. Not dramatically, not like a warning. Just the honest complaint of old wood, meeting substantial weight on a cold April morning. The kind of sound that gets forgotten in 30 seconds by everyone who hears it. That was fine. That was the point. Her name was Hester Cull, 58 years old, 63 inches tall on a generous day, wide as a barn door in the black wool dress she'd worn since Abilene, hair the color of old iron, twisted up under a bonnet that had survived 3 territories and wasn't looking for compliments about it. Face like weathered limestone, not ugly, not pretty, permanent, like she'd always been there and intended to stay. The town of Caldwell Crossing, Texas Panhandle, April of 1883. 300 souls pressed between the Canadian River and a ridge of red rock the locals called Ridgeline, because that was exactly what it was, and nobody out here had time for poetry. 1 main street, 1 church, 2 saloons. Because God and whiskey have always needed equal representation in Texas, and anyone who argues otherwise hasn't spent enough time in either establishment. She didn't look at any of it. She looked at the land office, walked to it without asking directions, without consulting a paper, without doing anything that suggested she'd arrived somewhere unfamiliar, which she hadn't. She'd been planning this for 2 years, studying maps, reading land records, writing letters under different names to different county clerks to piece together what this property was and who held it and how much money they needed and what condition the buildings were in and whether the limestone hollow behind the main house would do what she needed it to do. It would. She'd known it would before she ever got on the wagon in Abilene, so she walked to the land office, and Sheriff Burl Nesbitt watched her from his porch. Burl was 52, bad leg from a ball he'd taken in 71 that was buried too deep to extract, and had been educating him about barometric pressure ever since. 17 years wearing the badge in this county, which meant 17 years of reading people the way other men read newspapers. Quick, automatic. Filed. He looked at the widow. He looked again. Something. Not dangerous. Not suspicious exactly. Something he didn't have a word for, and that bothered him because he usually had words for things. She walked like a woman who already knew where every exit was. Head still. Eyes moving. Just barely. Left to right. Building to building. Doorway to doorway. The specific economy of movement that belongs to people who've learned that stillness doesn't mean safety, and that looking like you're not watching is the most important kind of watching. He'd seen that quality before. On men mostly. Men who'd been shot at enough times that peace made them nervous. He shifted his weight off the bad leg, watched the widow in the black dress walk straight into the land office without a single glance at the building that contained the man responsible for law and order in this county, which was either confidence or indifference. Either way. Interesting. Inside Price's general store. Across the street and 2 buildings down, Odette Price was doing 3 things at once, tallying a supply ledger, half listening to Hattie Morse complain about her neighbor's fence encroachment for the 4th time this month, and watching the street through the window with the quiet, focused attention of a woman who had been cataloging the human traffic of Cowdle Crossing for 22 years and found it endlessly instructive. She saw the widow come off the wagon. She saw Burl notice her. She saw Burl look away. And she saw, in the 2 seconds between the widow's arrival and the widow's disappearance into the land office, something that Burl had missed, because Burl was watching the woman's face while Odette was watching everything else. The wagon, load too heavy for furniture. The specific sag of weight distributed deliberately. Not household goods. Not personal effects arranged the way a woman moving house arranges her personal effects. Supplies. Organized supplies. The kind you pack when you know exactly how long you're going to be somewhere and what you're going to need when you get there. And I told him that fence has been leaning since October. Hattie, Odette said, without looking up from the ledger. Did you see who just arrived on the Amarillo stage? Hattie Morse squinted through the window. Some widow woman. Heavyset. What of it? Nothing, Odette said, and went back to her numbers, and did not write a single correct figure for the next 4 minutes. Because something about the way that woman moved felt less like arriving and more like returning to a place she'd already decided was hers. The land office smelled like old paper and the specific anxiety of men who wanted to own things they couldn't quite afford. Hester stood at the counter. The clerk's name was Purvis. Young, soft whiskers he was working harder on than they deserved. The particular self-importance of a man who controlled access to something valuable and had mistaken that control for personal significance. He did not look up immediately. Power move. Hester recognized it. She'd used it herself. In rooms considerably more dangerous than this one, she waited. The way she'd learned to wait. Not impatiently, not conspicuously, just present. Purvis finished his writing with theatrical deliberation. Looked up. The Ridgeline parcel, she said, before he could arrange his face into whatever expression he'd prepared. 740 acres. Registered to a Gideon Webb. I understand it's available, ma'am. I'd need to. I have cash. The theatrical deliberation evaporated. How much cash? Purvis said. She set a leather pouch on the counter. It landed with the sound of a conversation that was effectively over. He stared at it. I'll need to send for Mr. Webb, he said. Send for him. She sat in the chair by the window, folded her hands, and waited with the patience of a woman who had spent large portions of the last 12 years waiting for things she found considerably more unpleasant than this. 40 minutes later, Gideon Webb came through the door, 70 years old, and carrying every one of them in his face and his hands and the way he moved. Lean, sun-dried down to the essential, the kind of old that happens to men who've spent their whole lives outdoors, worrying about things they couldn't control, which described most men who worked land in Texas, and explained why most of them looked like Gideon Webb by the time they got to 70. His hands shook slightly, not from age, from something else. She filed that. You're the buyer, he said, looking at her, trying to look away, not quite managing it. You know the state of the property. I do. The house needs. I know the state of the property. she said again. Even. Patient. Like reading an item off a list. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she recognized. Not suspicion, something older and less focused than suspicion. The expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy in a direction he chose a long time ago and is only now, in this specific moment, wondering if the direction was right. "All right," he said quietly. They signed the papers. She paid in full, and 740 acres of red rock and dry grass, and one farmhouse that hadn't been loved in 6 years became the legal property of Hester Cull, widow of Denton Creek, of a life she had tried very hard to leave behind, and was now, deliberately, returning to the consequences of. She rode out to the property that afternoon alone. The track wound through scrubby cedar and limestone outcroppings, the ridge rising to her right, the flat panhandle stretching out west like a rumpled blanket. Someone had given up trying to smooth. The horse she'd bought in Amarillo, a gray mare, steady, opinionless, exactly what she needed, picked her way up without complaint. The house sat in a natural hollow where the ridge curved. 2 stories. Stone foundation doing its job. Wood frame gone silver gray from weather and time. 3 windows south-facing. Barn behind it, listing east but holding its shape. The bones were good. Everything else was negotiable. She stood in front of it for a while, not admiring it. Measuring it, the ridge behind gave natural cover from the north and west. Single-track approach from the south meant anyone coming up that road was visible for half a mile before they arrived. And the hollow, the specific curved shape of it, the way the limestone sat, created something she'd calculated from the surveyor's maps and needed to confirm in person. She cupped her hand, snapped her fingers once, listened. The sound came back from 3 different directions. Perfect. Acoustic amplification. Exactly what she'd hoped. She tied the mare and went inside. Main room. Dust. Stone fireplace. Staircase. 2 bedrooms up. Kitchen rear. Dry pump she'd need to prime. And in the kitchen floor, under a rotted braided rug, a trapdoor. She lifted it. Went down with her lantern. Stone walls. A packed dirt floor. Empty shelves. And in the back corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed wooden shelf, sitting in the dark like it had been sitting there, waiting for someone specific to come find it. A locked iron box, the size of a small traveling case. She crouched down in front of it, set the lantern beside her. Did not touch it yet. Just looked. There you are, she thought. 12 years. There you are. It was real. A whole, long, strange, expensive, careful journey. The dead-end telegrams, and the false name letters, and the surveyor's maps, and the land records, and the 2 years of planning she'd done in 3 rented rooms in 3 different cities. It was real. It was here. Under a farmhouse in the Texas Panhandle. Exactly where the information she'd traded 2 months and $400 for had said it would be. She stood up, let the trapdoor down, went to work. The first week, Hester was a curiosity. Caldwell Crossing had its rhythms. Newcomers arrived, got absorbed or didn't. Life continued either way. But a widow, alone buying the Ridgeline property, apparently intending to work 740 acres without help. That was a different category of arrival. People found reasons to ride past the property. Not to stop. Just to assess. What they saw was not what they'd predicted. She was mending fences. Methodically. The kind of fence work that requires understanding of tension and angle and soil composition, not just effort and wire. She was reinforcing the barn's east wall with timber she had apparently cut and hauled herself. And on the 4th day, she was digging what looked like drainage channels around the house foundation in a pattern that made no obvious practical sense. Unless You were thinking about something other than drainage. Odette Price noticed these things because noticing things was her primary occupation, and she was exceptionally good at it. She's been in 3 times this week, Odette told her husband Ferris over her. Ferris was a good man who had learned that the correct response to most of Odette's observations was a sound that acknowledged hearing without promising engagement. Flour, coffee, lamp oil, ammunition. Ferris made a sound, more ammunition than food. Significant margin, another sound, I'm going to bring her something Thursday. A pie. Just to, see what's what. Odette looked at her husband. You're not following any of this. Ammunition, he said. Pie. Got it. She brought the pie on Thursday. Hester was on the porch when Odette rode up, sitting in a chair that faced the approach road, which was a choice, not a coincidence, and Odette filed it as such the moment she saw it. Mrs. Cull? I'm Odette Price. I run the general store in town. I just wanted to welcome me. Yes, thank you. Hester looked at the pie, then at Odette. Sit down, plain, not polite exactly, but genuine. There was a difference, and Odette was good at telling them apart. She sat. The wind came off the ridge, dry and warm, the kind that smells like distance. They didn't speak for a bit. Odette was comfortable with silence in a way that most people who talked as much as she did were not. It was a skill she'd developed specifically for conversations where silence told you more than speech. You're measuring me, Hester said. Yes, I'm measuring you too. Fair enough. Odette looked at the fences, at the drainage channels, at the way the barn sat relative to the house and the hollow. Those channels aren't for drainage. No. You've thought carefully about who might come up that road. Hester said nothing, which was its own answer. Mrs. Cull. Odette set the pie on the rail. This town has a problem. Has had it about 8 months. The Dre family, Silas, Fletcher, and the youngest Cord. Hester set her coffee down. 18 men roughly, working this county since last fall. 3 homesteaders bought out under pressure. 1 burned. Sheriff Nesbitt files reports that go nowhere because the territorial circuit judge is either afraid of the Dreys or paid by whoever's behind them. Federal Marshal's office in Amarillo is understaffed by 2/3. Odette stared at her. How do you know all that? Hester looked at her. The eyes? Gray, flat, patient as the limestone behind the house. Did something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a warning. I read newspapers, she said, and picked up her coffee. Odette rode back to town that afternoon with considerably more questions than she'd arrived with, which, for a woman of her particular temperament, was not an uncomfortable condition. It was exactly the opposite. She was still thinking about those drainage channels. The way Hester Cull had said I read newspapers in the tone of someone reading the last line of a document they'd written themselves. Reuben Ketch arrived on a Friday. Came in quiet. The specific quiet of a man who was uncertain whether he wanted to be noticed. Dun horse. Brown coat that had been good quality a while ago. Face like a topographic map of somewhere difficult. 50 or 55. The kind of age that accumulates faster in certain lines of work. He tied his horse outside Price's store. Bought tobacco. Asked Odette, casual as checking the weather, if a woman named Cull had bought property out this way recently. Widow. Heavy set. Odette said yes. Said which direction. Watched his hands while she said it. They went still. Just for a moment. The way hands go still on people who've trained themselves not to react to things, and have mostly succeeded. He rode out to Ridgeline that afternoon. Hester was repairing the south fence. She heard the horse coming up the track and didn't turn. Her right hand moved from the wire to her hip in a motion so practiced it barely counted as motion. The horse stopped. The rider didn't speak. She turned. Reuben Ketch sat his dun horse 15 feet away, with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times and was finding the actual version different from every rehearsal. 3 full seconds she looked at him. "Ketch," she said. "Hester, not Mrs. Cull. Not ma'am, Hester." Which told her everything about how much he knew and how long he'd known it. "You look like hell," she said. "You look," he considered several things. Settled. "Like you're building something." "I am." "Or fortifying something." "Those aren't different." He climbed down, stood there with his hat in his hands, which was not a posture she associated with Reuben Ketch. Reuben Ketch stood like punctuation. The hard kind, the kind that ended things, but he was turning his hat, because there was history here. The kind that doesn't compress into any gesture or any sentence. The kind that just sits in the air between people and makes the air heavier. "How long have you known," she said, "that you were alive?" 8 months. He looked at the ridge. "Not at her. That you were here?" 3 days. "Who told you?" "Nobody." "Figured it. You bought the Webb property." He looked at her now. Straight on. Gideon Webb sold the Dunmore files. The temperature of everything changed. She went still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. Deeper, more complete. "Who told you about the Dunmore files?" "Nobody told me. I've been working a case out of Tascosa 6 months. Following money. Supply routes. Patterns that go somewhere they shouldn't." He took one step closer. "Colonel Aldous Vane. He's been building something out here, Hester. Goes a lot deeper than the Dre gang." She turned back to the fence, picked up the wire stretcher, not because the wire needed stretching, because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked. "How deep?" she said. "Whoever controls those files controls $40,000 in evidence, enough to put 6 men in prison, including a federal circuit judge and a colonel with friends in the War Department." The wire went taut. Gideon Webb sold that location to Silas Dre. She said, "I think so." "For what?" "Gambling debts." $400. He said it the way you say things that are both tragic and stupid. $400. For $40,000 worth of leverage, she fastened the wire. Stepped back. The fence was straight. Solid. "Would hold well," she said. "Yeah, you going to try to stop me?" The wind moved. Birds argued in the cedar somewhere. The afternoon light went long and red across the rock. "No," he said. "I came to help." She read him. The way she read everything. Quick. Thorough. "Filed why? Because of Denton Creek," he said. "Because I wasn't there. And I should have been." The air went heavy with something that wasn't going to be spoken. She looked away first. Back toward the house. "There's a cot in the tack room," she said. "Don't touch anything in the root cellar. And I may need someone to hold a lantern at some point because I only have 2 hands." He almost smiled. Caught himself. Smart man. That same Friday evening, in the back room of the Four Aces Saloon on Caldwell Crossing's South End, Silas Dre sat with his brother Fletcher and looked at a map, hand-drawn, detailed, the ridgeline property in careful lines. The approach road, the house, the barn, the fence positions, drawn by someone who knew every inch of that land. Silas was 47, the face of a man who found violence functional rather than interesting. A tool. Like a hammer. You picked it up when something needed driving and put it down when it didn't, and you didn't develop feelings about it either way. Fletcher was 44, the face of a man who was always thinking about 3 things simultaneously and finding all of them interesting. Where Silas was a hammer, Fletcher was a lockpick. Patient, precise, working the problem from the inside. "She's already reinforced the approach," Fletcher said, not looking up from the map. The channels around the foundation. They're not drainage, pressure indicators. Step wrong coming up that track at night. She'll know about it before you're halfway to the house. So we go in daylight, said Cord from the corner. Cord was 29, present in the way young men are present when they haven't yet understood that presence and usefulness are separate qualities. Silas looked at Cord with the patience of a man who has explained many things many times. Daylight, she can see the approach for half a mile, Fletcher said. She has more advantage, not less. Send more men. We sent 4 men to speak with the widow last week, Silas said. Quiet. Flat. Like water that's deep enough you can't see the bottom. Cord said nothing. She returned them. Silas folded his hands. One at a time, 12-hour intervals. Each one had a note pinned to his shirt explaining specifically what he'd done wrong. A silence. Notes, Cord said. Notes. What did they say? Different things. Silas looked at the map. The first one said, I counted 7 of you on the approach. The second, your man by the cedar break breathes too loud. The third, your flanking assumes I don't know this ridge. He paused. The fourth note said, next time, silence. Who is this woman? Cord asked. Silas looked at Fletcher. Fletcher had been doing what Fletcher did. He'd sent letters to contacts in Amarillo, Santa Fe, and Tascosa the day after Hester Cole bought the Ridgeline property. 2 had already replied. Her name is Hester Cole, born 1825, married James Cole in 1854, federal deputy, New Mexico Territory. She rode with him, not on the official payroll, but she rode with him. Fletcher kept his eyes on the map. Habit. He thought better when he wasn't looking at people. James Cole died at Glorieta Pass in 1865. After that, she continued working. Unofficial at first, then officially from 1866 to 1871. The Federal Marshal's Office used an internal designation for her. He paused. They called her the Ledger. Cord started to say something dismissive, reconsidered when he noticed his brothers' faces. The Ledger, Fletcher continued, documented every case she worked, every man she tracked, every piece of evidence she gathered. Not a gunfighter, something more inconvenient than a gunfighter. He looked at Silas now. A witness. Systematic, methodical, permanently documented. In 5 years, she built cases that sent 23 men to trial, 19 convictions. What happened in 1871, Silas said. Denton Creek. Fletcher's voice went careful. The way voices go careful around things still hot enough to burn. Her home. Burned. Her husband's brother's family was staying. 4 people. She was away on a case. Came back to, he stopped. She disappeared afterward. Federal records list her as probable deceased given the circumstances. But she isn't deceased, Silas said. No. And now she's here. And now she's here. Silas studied the map. The approach road, a hollow. The ridge. The drainage channels in their specific pattern. She came here deliberately, he said. Yes, bought this property specifically, yes. Because of what's underneath it. Fletcher said nothing, which was confirmation. She's not here to run cattle, Silas said. No. Cord looked between them, catching up, the expression of a man who'd thought this was about land and was realizing it was about something older and more complicated and considerably more dangerous. What do we do? He said. Silas stood, folded the map, buttoned his coat. The measured movements of a man preparing for a business transaction, not a confrontation. We find out what she knows and who else knows it. He walked to the door, stopped, looked back at Cord, and nobody pins anything to anybody. He left. Cord looked at Fletcher. Fletcher was already thinking about the third thing. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday. 2 of Silas's men. The ones he deployed when he wanted things done quietly. walked into Price's general store and began moving merchandise off the shelves with the slow, deliberate carelessness of men, demonstrating that they did not worry about breakage. Odette stood behind her counter, hands flat on the wood, face arranged into the particular blankness that in Odette's case meant the opposite of blank. Mrs. Price, the taller one. Name of Galt. Scar on his neck like a badly healed question mark. We need you to pass a message to your friend at Ridgeline. I don't carry messages. Galt picked up a jar of preserved peaches, turned it, set it down hard enough to rattle without breaking. The rattle was the message. The break would be the next one. Mr. Dre would like to discuss purchasing that property. Fair price. More than fair, he smiled. The kind of smile that's a different category of threat. It would be simpler for everyone. The bell above the door made its small sound. Hester Cole walked in. She looked at Galt, at the other man by the window, at the preserved peaches still vibrating slightly, at Odette's hands on the counter. She walked to the shelf, picked up the jar, set it back precisely where it had been. Morning, Odette, she said. Morning, steady. God bless her. Hester turned to look at Galt. Not with hostility, not with fear. With the quality of attention you give to a problem you are in the process of analyzing. Galt was a large man. He was accustomed to his size arriving in rooms before the rest of him and doing most of the preliminary work. The widow was not small, but she was a woman, old, round. He had youth and 20 pounds and a gun on her. These were the calculations happening behind his eyes. You could see them happening. Tell Mr. Dre, Hester said, that the property is not for sale. Now, ma'am. And tell him the 4 men from last week were careless. The next ones should be quieter, and the ones after those, she picked up her list from the counter, should think carefully about whether they want to be the ones who come. Galt's jaw set. His hand moved toward his holster. Not drawing, just moving that direction. The beginning of an implication. Hester did not look at the hand. She looked at his face. That family in the corner, she said, quietly, not shifting her eyes. There was indeed a woman with 2 small children in the corner of the store, very still, watching. Those children don't need to see whatever you're considering, Hester said, and you don't need them to see it either, because you know where that story goes for you. A pause, the length of a controlled breath. Think about it. He thought about it. A hand came back to his belt. Mr. Dre will hear about this, he said. I expect so. She turned to Odette. Flour, coffee, and the shells I ordered. The 2 men left. The bell made its small sound in their wake. The children in the corner breathed again. Odette stared at Hester, at the complete mundaneness with which she was consulting her shopping list. You knew they were in here, saw their horses outside. Hester looked up from the list. The flour first. I need to get back. You're not worried. Hester considered the word, turned it over. I've been worried since 1871, she said. I'm tired of it. I find preparation more useful. She set the list on the counter. Don't forget the shells. That night she sat at the kitchen table, single candle, map of the property in front of her, Reuben's notes alongside it, the locked iron box to her left, still locked, the key on a chain around her neck where it had been for 3 years. She thought about Galt's face, the moment he'd calculated and reconsidered. That moment was information. It said, Silas Dre was not a man who wasted assets on lost causes. He'd pull Galt back and think about what he'd learned. Which meant she had some time, not much, but some. She thought about Fletcher, because Fletcher was the one that mattered. Not Silas. Silas was a hammer with tactical sense, manageable. Fletcher was the kind of intelligence that adapted, that absorbed failure and came back changed. That learned Fletcher would know about the iron box. If Gideon Webb had sold the property's layout, which he had, she was nearly certain, then Fletcher knew about the root cellar. And if Fletcher knew about the root cellar, he knew why Hester Cole had come to Caldwell Crossing, which meant the timeline was shorter than she'd built it for. Reuben appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been in the main room reviewing his notes. They'd developed a system already. The way people who've worked together before fall back into old rhythms without discussing them. Vane is in Amarillo, Reuben said. Arrived Monday. Meeting with the circuit court administrator tomorrow. Judge Holbrook? Yes. Holbrook is bought, probably. Not probably. She tapped the map. Dunmore files have 3 pages specifically about Holbrook. Payment dates. Amounts. Specific rulings they correspond to. She looked up. Vane needs those files destroyed, not used. That's the whole point. Reuben sat down across from her. Looked at the locked box. Open it, he said. I know. Make sure everything's still. I know. So why haven't you? The candle moved in some small current of air. Because, once I open it, she said, this stops being something I'm planning and becomes something I'm doing. He looked at her, at the woman he'd known when she was different. When the weight she carried was the ordinary, professional weight of difficult work, rather than the specific, permanent weight of catastrophe survived. Hester, you've been doing it since you got here. Whether you open the box or not, she knew that. She reached up, unclasped the chain. The key was small and iron and warm from sitting against her skin for 3 years. Set it on the table, looked at it. James, she thought. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry I told myself I was protecting something when I was just afraid. She wasn't going to cry. She hadn't cried since the first year. She let herself feel it. The full weight of 12 years of carrying this particular thing in this particular direction. Before she picked up the key and put it in the lock. The box opened, papers inside, dozens of them, organized. Her own handwriting, younger and steadier than the handwriting she had now. Evidence, affidavits, ledger entries from the Dunmore accounts, names, dates, transactions. The documented record of 12 men's corruption. Built over 5 years of careful patient work and preserved through 12 years of flight and fear. She looked at it for a long time, closed the box without locking it. It's all here, she said. Good now. She looked at the map. The candle, the notes. Let's talk about what happens next. Outside, the ridge sat dark and still against the moonless sky, and 3 miles south, in the upper window of the Four Aces Saloon. A lantern moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, Fletcher Dray's signal for a private conversation. And below that window, in the shadow of the building, Gideon Webb stood in the dark and looked up at the light and hated himself completely and climbed the back stairs anyway. Burl Nesbitt came to the Ridgeline property at first light on Saturday morning, tied his horse, came up to the porch, didn't sit. Too much weight in him for sitting. Hester was already there, coffee in hand, watching the approach road the way she watched it every morning now, not anxiously, just attentively. The way you watch weather, because weather comes regardless. And watching means you aren't surprised. I heard about the incident at Price's, he said. Barely an incident. Galt doesn't usually back down. He did the arithmetic. She looked at Nesbitt, the limestone face, the steady eyes behind it. You're not here about Galt. He was quiet for a moment, a gray morning light moving behind him. 17 years I've worn this badge, he said. I've handled what came at this town with what I had. Which wasn't always adequate. He shifted off the bad leg, old habit. I'm not a fool, Mrs. Cull. I know what the Dray situation is. I know Vane is behind it. And I know what's in that root cellar of yours. She looked at him. People talk, he said. Gideon Webb talked more than he realized, to more people than he intended. He did, she said. I can't act officially. Anything I do goes through Holbrook's court, and Holbrook kicks it back and makes things worse. He put his hands in his coat pockets, looked at the road she was looking at. But I can tell you things, what I see, what my instincts say about timing. She looked at him for a long moment. What do your instincts say right now, Sheriff? He exhaled slowly. 10 days before Silas Dray stops being patient. Maybe 5 before Vane stops letting him handle it. She nodded once, confirming what she'd already calculated. Coffee, she said. He looked almost surprised. If it's no trouble, it's hot. It exists. That's the extent of my hospitality at this hour. He sat on the porch step. She poured him a cup from the pot on the rail. They sat in the early light, the ridge going red in the first sun, the approach road empty and quiet below them. Two people who'd spent their lives reading signs that other people either missed or ignored, reading them, now waiting. The trouble arrived on a Thursday, which was typical. In Hester's experience, trouble rarely came on Mondays. Mondays were too predictable. Trouble preferred the middle of the week, when your alertness was already spent on the first half, and you hadn't started conserving it for the end. Thursday, April 19th. She was mending the east fence when she heard the horses. Not 1, not 2, 5, coming up the approach road with no attempt at quiet, which was itself a message. We're not sneaking, we're arriving. There's a distinction. We want you to know we understand the distinction. She kept working, didn't turn, didn't move toward the rifle 3 feet to her left. Just kept mending, because there is a specific response to intimidation that intimidation doesn't know how to answer. Kapleemed it indifference. The horses stopped 30 feet behind her. Silence. Wind. Mrs. Cull. Fletcher Dray's voice. She'd heard Reuben's description often enough that she recognized the quality of it immediately. Measured. Educated. The particular diction of a man who'd found schooling useful but insufficient. She turned around. 5 men on horses. Fletcher centered. Brown coat. No hat. She'd noticed that before in Reuben's notes, and here it was confirmed. The kind of man who didn't wear hats, because hats implied you worried about the sun, and Fletcher Dray did not worry about things as simple as the sun. 44. Lean. Face like an equation that hadn't been solved yet. She knew that kind of intelligence. Had seen it before, on both sides of various situations. The kind that was dangerous not because it was cruel, but because it was curious. And curiosity adapts in ways that cruelty doesn't. Mr. Dray, I apologize for the incident at the store. He said it the way men apologize when apologizing is a strategic move rather than an expression of remorse. My men were clumsy. They were. I prefer directness. I've gathered. He looked at the fence, at the wire tension, at the post spacing, at the pattern of the work. You do good work, he said, and meant it. Which was, somehow, more unsettling than if he'd been lying. What do you want, Mr. Dray? The property? No, the horses shifted. Small movements. Restless, Mrs. Cull. He tilted his head slightly, the adjustment of a man changing his approach mid-sentence. We both know what's in the root cellar. We both know why you're here. Perhaps we can skip the performance. She looked at him steadily. It's a standoff, she said. It doesn't have to be. It already is. The question isn't whether it's a standoff. The question is who blinks first. She turned back to the fence. I don't blink, Mr. Dray. Ask anyone who's worked with me. A long silence behind her. Then 5 horses turning. Then nothing. She kept working, hands steady. Heart not quite as steady. But close enough. Don't blink, she told herself. You've waited 12 years. Don't start blinking now. That evening, Reuben came in from town with a folded telegraph message. Set it on the kitchen table without comment. She read it. Read it again. Colonel Aldous Vane had left Amarillo, traveling east. Expected arrival, Caldwell Crossing. 4 days. She set the message down. 4 days, she thought. Fletcher was the preview. Vane is the main event. How many men does Vane travel with? Depends on what he wants to look like. Reuben sat. Poured coffee. Official. 6. Not official. More. He won't want to look official here. She tapped the message. He'll come in heavy. Not uniformed. But heavy. We need more people. We have Nesbitt who can observe but not engage. Odette who is resourceful but not trained. You, she looked at him. And me, that's 3, that's 3. It's not enough, I know. She stood. Walked to the window. The ridge invisible in the darkness. Just darkness where rock should be. I need to think while you're thinking. Reuben turned his cup slowly. Fletcher came out here to measure you. Not threaten you. Measure, which means he's already past the threatening stage. Yes. He's going to try something that isn't force. Something I won't see coming, because force has failed twice, and Fletcher Dre does not fail the same way a third time. No, she said. He doesn't. She kept looking at the dark where the ridge was. What am I missing? She thought. What variable? What piece that's sitting right in front of me? And then Gideon Webb, the thought arrived not like lightning, but like a door, opening slowly in a cold room. Gideon Webb had sold the map of the property, but Gideon Webb had also lived on this property for 9 years. He knew every board, every stone, every entrance and exit that wasn't on any map, and Gideon Webb still owed $400 to people who didn't accept delays. Reuben. Yeah. Find out where Gideon Webb has been spending his evenings. A pause. You think. Desperate men make decisions that surprise themselves. She turned from the window. And Fletcher Dre is very good at finding desperate men. She was right. She was nearly always right about that kind of thing, which was not a comfort. Being right about bad things approaching did not prevent the bad things. It just meant you felt their full weight for longer. Reuben came back the next morning, sat down, didn't look at her directly for a moment, which was itself information. 4 Aces Saloon, he said, back room, 3 times in 2 weeks. After dark. Gideon went up the back stairs. She sat with it. $400, she thought. He sold 12 years of work. Not for malice. Not for ideology. Not even for real greed. Fear. Just fear. She understood exactly how a man arrived at that place. The debt accumulating past the point of managing. The shame of it. The paralysis. And then someone offering a door. Not a good door. Not a door that led anywhere worth going, but a door in a room where all the walls had been closing in for too long. She understood it, and it didn't change anything. He's given them access routes, she said. Almost certainly, which means they can come in from the north. Through the cedar break, which your channels don't cover. No. She stood, started moving. 3 steps one direction, turn. 3 steps back, the way she'd always thought. Movement and stillness trading off like breathing. We have to extend the perimeter. Tonight. Before, sound from outside, not the approach road, from the north from the cedar break. Both of them went still. The sound came again. Not horses. Too careful for horses. Boots on limestone. 2 sets. Maybe 3. Moving with professional quiet. That was nevertheless not professional enough, because the hollow did what it always did. Bounced sound off the limestone and delivered it back to the house from 3 directions at once. Reuben's hand went to his gun. Hester shook her head. She waited. 1 minute, 2. The sounds moved in a slow circle at distance, not approaching the house directly. mapping, measuring, identifying where the light was and where it wasn't. She turned the lamp down. Not out. Low. Enough to make the windows look occupied. Then she went out the back door. Into the dark. Reuben held the house. That was their arrangement. Worked out without discussion. The way things get worked out between people who've operated together before and trust each other's instincts about who does what. The night was cold. Stars dense. The limestone pale in their light. She moved across the yard without sound in a way that had nothing to do with physical lightness and everything to do with 30 years of learning exactly where to put each foot. James Cull had been an exceptional teacher. She went wide around the north edge, came into the cedar break from outside rather than through it, and found them, two men. Young, professional in the specific way of men hired for particular work rather than general muscle, crouched at the north edge of the property, making marks in the dirt with a stick, drawing a sketch by feel in the dark. She stood behind them for a long time. They had no idea she was there. I love this property, she thought. Evening, she said. They spun. She had the Colt out, not pointed, just present. The way a fact is present. You're sketching my north fence line, she said, which suggests you're planning to use the cedar break as an approach route. The men looked at each other. I'd advise against it, she said. It's late. I'm tired. I shoot better than I look. And most things about me are better than I look. She tilted her head. Leave the sketch. Leave the horses. Walk back to town. She sent them back on foot with a note for Fletcher Dray written on the back of one man's shirt pocket with a pencil stub from behind her ear. Next time, come yourself. H.C. Fletcher got the message at 3 in the morning. He didn't sleep after that. Sat at the table in the back room of the Four Aces. Looked at the ceiling. Thought she'd neutralized 5 separate approaches now. Each time using methods that indicated she'd anticipated the approach before it arrived. Which meant she wasn't responding to what he did. She was ahead of what he did. Which meant she had information she shouldn't have. More than the files alone would give her. More than property familiarity accounted for. Someone is talking to her, he thought. Not Nesbitt. Not Price. Reuben Ketch. The man who'd appeared a week after the widow. Former federal connection. But Ketch didn't know the operation's internal details. Ketch knew only what was in the files. And the files were still in the widow's root cellar. So how? His pencil moved on the paper in front of him. Habit. He thought best with his hand moving. A name appeared. He stared at it. Cord, his youngest brother, who was, in various specific ways, unreliable. No, he thought. Not possible. Cord is careless, but he's. Cord had been out 3 nights this week. Said he was drinking. Plausible. Cord drank, but he'd come back with the specific quality of sobriety that suggested he hadn't been drinking as much as he'd wanted people to believe. Fletcher's pencil moved again. 3 weeks ago. Amarillo. Cord had gone to bring back a man Vane wanted hired. He'd returned with the man. But the man had seemed uncertain, had looked at Cord. Twice with the expression of someone who wasn't sure what role he was supposed to be playing. Fletcher stood, walked to the window. The main street of Caldwell Crossing, empty and dark at 3 in the morning. Cord, he thought. What did you do? Cord Dray was 29 years old and had been genuinely, deeply, comprehensively frightened for 6 months. This was not his natural condition. His natural condition was loud and confident and somewhat too combative for situations that didn't call for it, which was most situations. He'd always operated on the assumption that aggression clarified things, made the parameters of a situation obvious, got you to the outcome faster. 6 months ago, he'd done something that couldn't be undone. He'd taken money from Colonel Vane. Before he'd understood what Vane was, when it had looked like a business arrangement between his brother and a well-connected Eastern man who needed some regional assistance. Easy money. More money than Cord had seen in 2 years of running with the drays through Kansas and Indian Territory. He'd taken it, and then Vane had explained what he expected in return. Not muscle. Information, specifically, information about the federal marshal's operation in Amarillo. Who was where, what they were working, who might be approachable, and who couldn't be touched. Cord didn't have that information, but Vane thought he did, because someone had told Vane that Cord had a contact in the marshal's office, which was true in the loosest possible sense. There was a deputy in Amarillo named Cassidy that Cord played cards with occasionally. A casual acquaintance, kind of connection Cord had never thought of as significant. Vane thought it was extremely significant. And once Cord understood what Vane actually was, the full scope of it, the depth of it, how many people were involved, and how completely Cord was expected to stay purchased, it was too late. You didn't walk away from Aldous Vane. Walking away from Aldous Vane was not something that led to more walking. So Cord had done what people do when they're too afraid to go forward and too afraid to go back. He'd gone sideways. 6 weeks ago, on a night when he'd told Silas he was drinking, he'd ridden north hard and found the federal marshal's office in Tascosa. He'd asked for the supervising deputy. He'd sat in a cold room and said things he couldn't take back. And Reuben Ketch had listened. Had not arrested him. Had said carefully that what Cord had provided was useful. That continued provision of information about Vane's movements would be more useful. That if Cord cooperated fully, Ketch had said, with emphasis, there might be consideration of his situation when the matter resolved. Might not would. Cord was aware of the distinction. Every single day, he rode back to Caldwell Crossing under stars that felt accusatory, and lay in his bed in the room above the Four Aces, listening to Fletcher think in the room across the hall. He could always tell when Fletcher was thinking. The silence was a different quality, and considered what would happen if Fletcher figured out what he'd done. He thought about it, frequently. It was not a soothing thing to think about. Reuben told Hester about Cord on a Wednesday morning. Everything. The Tascosa meeting, the arrangement, what Cord had been providing, the fact that Cord was the reason they'd known Vane's travel timeline, the reason they'd known about the North approach plan before it happened. Hester listened without expression. When Reuben finished, the coffee had gone cold. He's scared, Reuben said. I know. He didn't want to be in this. He got pulled in before he understood. Reuben, he's 29. I know. She set the cold cup down. I understand how someone gets there. Afraid, and then more afraid, and then making the decision that makes you more afraid because you couldn't think of anything else. She looked at the table. I understand that very well. A pause. He's useful, she said. As long as Silas doesn't know about him, yes. Which means we use him carefully. And not more than necessary. Every use increases the risk that Fletcher sees the pattern. Fletcher is already seeing patterns. I know, she stood. How long until Vane arrives? 2 days now. 2 days. She walked to the window. The approach road. The ridge. The landscape she'd spent 3 weeks learning. 2 days, she thought. 2 days and 3 people and a locked iron box and 12 years of waiting that I am finished with. Done. Send a message to Marshal Sykes. She said. Reuben went still. Dot Sykes is in New Mexico. I know where she is. Even if she rides the moment she gets it, she can't arrive in. Send the message. Hester turned. And ride to town and brief Nesbit. Everything. not some things. He needs the full picture before Vane arrives. He can't act officially. He needs to know. Understanding and acting are different things. She moved toward the root cellar. And Reuben, she stopped. Didn't turn. Don't tell Cord we know about him. He needs to believe his cover is intact. If he thinks he's been discovered, he might panic. He might do the right thing if he knew he's doing the right thing now. Scared people doing right things is useful. Scared people who know they've been seen sometimes do wrong things very fast. She pulled up the trapdoor. Leave him scared. It's the kinder option. She went down into the root cellar, opened the iron box, and began making copies of the most critical pages in her own handwriting. The day before Vane arrived, Gideon Webb knocked on her door. She stood on the other side of it, for a moment, with her hand on the frame, feeling the weight of what she knew about him. The $400. The map, the access routes drawn from 9 years of living on this land. She opened the door. He stood on the porch, old, small, the sun making no concessions to his dignity, hat in his hands, the posture of a man who has used up all of his dignity and is standing in what remains beneath it. Mrs. Cull. He couldn't look at her directly. I need to tell you something, I know, she said. He looked up. Startled. About Fletcher Dray, she said. The maps. The north approach through the cedar break. She stepped back. Come in. He sat at the kitchen table. Didn't touch the coffee, she said in front of him. I needed the money. The debts were. He stopped. Started over. That's not a reason. I know that's not a reason. She sat across from him. Waited. They said they just wanted to scare you. Make you sell. He looked at his hands. Nobody was going to. Mr. Webb. He stopped. People who run this kind of operation do not scare and leave, she said, even. Quiet. They scare and then they hurt and then they take. You knew that. His hands shook. Yes, he said. Very small, and you did it anyway. Yes, she thought about Denton Creek, about learning who had opened the door. Not the men who'd done the actual harm, but the ones before them. The ones who'd sold information, for money or fear or some tired, exhausted combination of both. She'd had feelings about those people. Strong ones. She thought about what she'd actually done about those feelings, and what that had cost her, Gideon. I'm going to ask you one question. The truth protects you. A lie does the opposite. He looked at her. What exactly did you tell them about this property? He told her everything. 14 minutes. When he finished, he looked like a man who'd put down something very heavy and wasn't sure he had any right to feel better for it. She referenced everything he'd said against what she already knew. Almost all confirmed one addition. A second entrance to the root cellar. Through the barn. Through a drainage tunnel built in the 1860s by the original owner who hadn't wanted it on any map. Gideon had forgotten it until Fletcher's systematic questioning pulled it out of him. Fletcher knew about the tunnel. She hadn't known about the tunnel. She looked at the old man for a moment. Thank you, she said. He blinked. Like the words had landed wrong. You could have not come, she said. That took something. She stood. Go home. Lock your door. Don't open it until this is over. He went. She stood in the kitchen, the barn, the tunnel. All right, she thought. One more thing to prepare. She'd been building an architecture of readiness against a threat that kept showing her new faces. Each new face, she looked at it. Thought. Adjusted. Added something else to the structure. Because this was her home now. Because she was done running, 12 years done. And whoever came up that road tomorrow was going to understand exactly what that meant. Broken Lance came down from the Llano Estacado on a Thursday morning. Word reached Caldwell Crossing by noon. Rider from the Harmon homestead 6 miles east. Face pale, hands shaking on the reins. The Kiowa, moving west. 17 horses. 2 homesteads already evacuated. No violence yet. The word yet did the heavy lifting in every sentence. Burl Nesbitt came to Ridgeline that afternoon and did not look like a man who had received manageable news. 3 families already in from the east, he said, standing on the porch. Too much in him for a chair. I can't raise a militia. Half the men in town are hired hands. Half of those are scared of Dre. The other half are scared of Kiowa. Nobody is scared of the right things at the right times. Broken Lance, Hester said. He's been peaceful since '79. Whatever's moving him, isn't him. She looked at Reuben. Vain. Reuben nodded, the nod of a man who'd done that arithmetic already and hadn't enjoyed the result. Vane has been supplying them, he said, repeating rifles through a middleman in Adobe Wells. Since January, Kiowa move west, raid the eastern homesteads, create chaos. Army gets called. County is in uproar. Vane rides in with the solution and the money, buys Ridgeline at emergency distress prices, gets the files. Destroys them, he paused. Everyone goes home. Except the families that burned. Burl's face went through several stages of comprehension. How do you stop a Kiowa warband with 3 people and a locked box, he said. You don't fight the warband, Hester said. You remove the reason they're moving, meaning, I go talk to Broken Lance. The porch went quiet enough to hear the wind in the cedars. Burl looked at Reuben. Reuben studied the porch railing. Odette's brother, who'd ridden out that morning with supplies and information, looked carefully at the middle distance. You speak Kiowa, Burl said. Not quite a question. Some. James worked New Mexico territory 11 years. You acquire things. She was already moving toward the door. Pulling together the medical bag, the trade goods she'd bought in Amarillo, specifically for this contingency, because she'd known, because Fletcher was too methodical, not to use every available lever, and Vane was too strategic not to have prepared this months in advance. Broken Lance doesn't know the rifles came from Vane. He thinks they came from willing commercial sellers at Adobe Wells. If he knew who arranged it and why and what Vane gets from it, she picked up the bag. That's a different conversation. He might. Still, he might. She headed for the door. But I spent 12 years afraid to do things that might not work. She stopped at the threshold, looked back. Look at how that turned out. She was out the door before either of them found an answer to that. She rode east into the flat brightness of the Panhandle afternoon, the kind of light that makes distances deceptive. She adjusted for it, adjusted for direction of movement, pace, time of day, where a Kiowa band would water horses in late afternoon, found them at a creek bed 6 miles out, 17 horses, 16 men and 2 boys. Camp in the cottonwoods, fire small, and positioned to minimize smoke. They're not raiding, she thought, pulling up short. They're moving. Vane created a story the county is reading as aggression. This is displacement. Someone pushed them. She rode in without announcing herself, which was either the correct instinct or the wrong one, and she genuinely didn't know which until the rifles came up. And she stopped the gray mare and sat very still and let the moment be exactly what it was. Broken Lance came forward, 52. Face like terrain. Eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He looked at her for a long time. She looked at him, 3 seconds to say something that was not a lie, not an insult, not a performance. The rifles that came to you, she said. In the Kiowa she had, imperfect, careful, the man who sent to them. He used you to create trouble so he could come in and take land. She reached into her bag, slowly, set copies of Vane's supply receipts on the saddle horn, his records, his name, the money he paid. what he expected to get. Broken Lance looked at the papers, then at her. "Why do you bring this to me?" he said, in English, clear and precise, which told her he'd been waiting to see what she'd say before he revealed that. "Because you deserve to know who made you a tool," she said, "and because I'd rather we solve the same problem separately than fight each other while the man who created it watches from somewhere safe." A long silence. The cottonwoods moved. Horses shifted. "The woman who gives a Kiowa chief evidence against a white man," he said. "What does she want?" 3 days, she said. "Then move wherever you were going. The whole county looking at Vane instead of you." He studied her. "You are not afraid," he said. "I'm very afraid," she said. "I'm just too tired to let it keep making my decisions." He almost smiled. Not quite. But the near miss of it was enough. She rode back toward the ridge in the long red evening light, hands easy on the reins, the gray mare steady beneath her. 3 days, she thought. He'll hold 3 days, which means I have 2. Vane arrived on a Friday. From the south. Up the Goodnight Trail, not from Amarillo, not from the east, which was wrong, which was deliberate, which meant he'd known someone was monitoring his expected route and had changed it. Cord got word to them Friday morning via a message, under a loose board in the livery stable. Handwriting tight and small with the pressure of a man writing under sustained fear. South approach. Today, not tomorrow. More men than expected. 42. Hester read it, folded it, set it in the fire. 42, Reuben said. "Yes, we have 3. Yes," she stood. Moved to the window, the table, the door, back to the window. Faster than usual. Because 42 was a different problem than 20. 42 required different thinking. Not force against force. Not even guile against force. Something else. What do I have, she thought. What do I actually have right now? The files, leverage in a courthouse, useless in a field, the property itself, the hollow, the ridge, the acoustics that she knew and they didn't. Reuben Odette, who was not trained, but had been preparing for 2 weeks and knew every building in Caldwell Crossing from inside and out. Nesbitt, who couldn't engage officially but had 17 years of local knowledge, and a deputy who was scared but loyal. Cord. Inside the operation. With information Vane's men were acting on, information that Cord could. She stopped moving. Cord is inside. And Fletcher doesn't know Cord is compromised. And Vane's men are following a plan built on information Cord fed them, information that Cord could change. Just one piece. "Reuben," she said. He read her face. He'd seen that expression before. In a different decade. In a situation that had resolved, against significant odds, in their favor. "What," he said, "send Cord a message. Tell him I need one thing changed in what Vane was told about this property." "Which thing?" "The root cellar." She sat, picked up her pencil. Started drawing. "Vane thinks the only access is through the kitchen trapdoor. Tell Cord to tell Fletcher that I'll be defending the root cellar from below. That the kitchen trapdoor is the critical approach." She kept drawing. "So when his first group goes straight for the kitchen, they walk into a room you've had 3 weeks to prepare, and the men circling outside to cut off escape. Hit your extended drainage channels, and Silas's reserve group can't come up the approach road." Reuben was ahead of her now. "Because Nesbitt and his deputy are going to block it with Odette's supply wagon, positioned like it broke down." "Yes." He looked at her diagram. "You've been building this for 3 weeks, he said, "since before I knew Cord existed. Since before Vane's arrival date was confirmed." She folded the paper. "Because this was always going to happen. The only variables were number and timing." "The files," he said. "Where are they?" "Nesbitt's office. False bottom of the gun cabinet." Already moved, she looked at him. Copies in Odette's storage cellar, and one complete copy already in the federal clerk's office in Tascosa. Sent Monday morning with a rider I paid in Amarillo before I came here. He stared at her. You sent a rider Monday, he said, before Vane changed his route. Before we knew the number, Reuben, she put her coat on. I've been the ledger for 17 years. I don't own one copy of anything. I have 3. I have never in my entire professional life put all of my evidence in one location. She looked at him. I've been waiting 12 years. I'm not going to lose this because I got careless at the end. He was quiet for a moment. The iron box in the root cellar, he said. Empty since Tuesday. He almost laughed. What's in it? Rocks. She buttoned her coat. And a note. What does the note say? She opened the door. The afternoon light came in, red and long in Texas and wide. You studied the wrong woman, she said, and walked out into it. Vane came at dawn. Of course he did. Men like Aldous Vane always came at dawn, because dawn was psychological, because dawn said, we took your sleep and now we're taking everything else, because dawn was when the body was coldest, and the will was thinnest, and the distance between sleeping and dying felt its shortest. Hester had been awake since midnight. So had Reuben. So had Odette, positioned in the upper room of her store, with a Winchester and 22 years of accumulated patience, regarding men who thought small towns were easy targets. So had Burl Nesbitt, who had his deputy, and Odette's brother, and a supply wagon. Blocking the south approach and a face that had decided unofficial was a word that meant something different this morning. Dawn came in red and cold over the panhandle. 42 men came with it. Hester stood at the kitchen window and watched them come up the approach road, well armed, moving in 4 distinct groups, each angled toward a different quadrant of the property. Precise, coordinated. Fletcher's planning, not Vane's. Vane would be at the back, protected, directing from the position that generals have always chosen. Far enough back that bullets don't reach. She watched the groups divide and move, Group 1 heading straight for the front of the house, confident. Because Cord had told Fletcher that Hester would be in the root cellar defending it. Through the kitchen trapdoor. Group 1 was going to walk through an open front door, into a room she'd had 3 weeks to prepare. Wait, she told herself. Wait. Now she went out the back. The front group found the door open, which confused them, which was the first mistake. A locked door tells you someone's home, and a woman who wants you uncertain leaves hers open. 7 men into the main room, fast. Professional, spreading out, and then the first man stepped on the board. She'd repositioned 3 inches east of where it had sat for 6 years. The board connected via a cord run under the floorboards to a row of tin cans packed with gravel on the window ledges. The sound was extraordinary. 7 professional men in professional silence suddenly found themselves in a room full of chaos, and in that moment of shock, of flinching, of eyes snapping to windows expecting fire, Reuben came through the interior door, not shooting, holding his badge, the federal marshal's badge he hadn't worn in 6 years. Carried in his coat pocket since Tascosa, federal marshal's authority, he said, loud and clear and completely certain. This property is subject to an active federal evidence seizure. Every man who puts his weapon on the floor right now walks away. Every man who doesn't, he looked at them. Even. Steady. Answers to a charge of interference with federal proceedings. 3 weapons hit the floor immediately. The others looked at each other. At the badge, 2 more went down. The last 2 held. Reuben looked at them. Think about it, he said. They thought they went down. Outside, the second group hit the eastern drainage channels, not the original channels. The extended ones, dug by lamplight, over 4 consecutive nights, after Cord's message about the north approach. Channels filled with a specific mixture of loosened soil and dry grass that looked solid. And wasn't 4 men went into the ground, up to their knees in rapid and undignified succession. Not dangerous, not designed to injure, just completely and immediately stopped. The men behind them pulled up short, trying to understand why the men in front had apparently decided to sit down for no visible reason. The confusion bought 90 seconds. Odette fired once from the ridge above, into the air, but from a position that told Group 2 that someone was above them on high ground. Which meant they were in a depression. Which meant they were exactly where they did not want to be. They pulled back. She fired once more. They pulled back faster. The third group went for the barn. The tunnel. Fletcher's ace. The approach the widow wasn't supposed to know about. They found it exactly where Gideon Webb had told Fletcher it would be. Went in 4 at a time through the dark, moving toward the root cellar, where they found the iron box and a candle burning beside it. A courtesy and a note. The man in front read it twice. Read it to the man behind him. You studied the wrong woman. And while they were reading, the trapdoor above them opened. Hester dropped 2 things through the opening. A lantern turned low, and a piece of paper. The paper landed on top of the box. The man picked it up. A list, 17 names. Dates and dollar amounts beside each name. The kind of list that represented years of work and meant prison for every person on it. Vane's name at the top. Fletcher Dray's name 4th. The man looked up at the open trapdoor. "What do we do?" he said. Hester's voice came down from above, calm, like she was discussing fence maintenance. "Whatever you want," she said. "But those files are already in 3 other locations. The federal clerk in Tascosa has the originals, so whatever you do here only affects what happens to you specifically." A pause. I'd think carefully. Long silence in the dark tunnel. "We're coming out," the man said. "I know," she said. The 4th group found Burl Nesbitt, his deputy. Odette's brother with a shotgun and the expression of a man with nothing particular to lose. The supply wagon blocking the road at an angle that would have been difficult even without armed men beside it. They stopped, 42 men, every approach blocked, disrupted, redirected, not by an army, not by superior firepower, not by anything that could be counted and matched and overcome the way Vane's men had been trained to count and match and overcome, by a woman who had spent 12 years learning exactly how to become inconvenient. Silas Dray understood it first. He was positioned to the west, watching with the flat, systematic attention of a man who thought in outcomes rather than actions. He watched Group 1 fail, watched Group 2 fail, watched the 4th group stop at the road. He turned to Fletcher beside him. Fletcher's face was doing something unusual, something that involved rapid recalculation and dissatisfaction with the results. "She knew about the tunnel," Fletcher said, quietly, to himself as much as to Silas. "Yes, she knew about the route changes. Yes, she's been 3 steps ahead since she arrived." He looked at the house in the hollow, the stone foundation, the ridge behind it. 3 steps consistently, which means she had information. He stopped. "Cord," Silas looked at his brother. "I think so," Fletcher said, very quietly. The longest pause Fletcher Dray had taken in any conversation in 10 years. Silas looked at the house, at the approach road, at 42 men in various stages of stopped, confused, and reconsidering their immediate futures. "All right," he said, and walked toward the house alone. Both hands visible. The walk of a man who has made a calculation and is now enacting it. Hester was on the porch, when Silas came up the approach road. Reuben in the doorway behind her, hand on his gun. She felt it without looking. Silas stopped at the foot of the steps, two people taking each other's full measure in the morning light. "I want to talk about Vane," he said, which was not what she'd expected. She let the silence ask the question. "Vane hired us to acquire the property," Silas said, flat, unadorned. The way he said everything. "We were told it was about mineral rights. We were not told the full scope of what he wanted or why." He looked at her. "There are things on your list I didn't know about." She studied his face. The flat surface of it. The specific quality of a man telling an uncomfortable truth, because the alternative was worse. "The fourth name on that list," he said. "Fletcher." "Yes. Things Fletcher did before my operation. Before I knew him well enough to understand the extent of what he was capable of." He looked at the ridge briefly. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm stating facts." "Sit down, Mr. Dre," she said. He sat on the step. She sat in her chair, and they talked for 40 minutes about things neither had planned to discuss. What Vane had told the Dreys versus what was actually true. What Fletcher had done before. Silas had the full picture. What the files contained, and what they would mean when Reuben's federal authority was fully activated. At the end, Silas stood. "Where is Vane?" she said, half a mile east. "Waiting for a success report. He's going to wait a while." "Yes." Something crossed his face. "Adjacent to regret, but not quite it. I'll bring him to you." She looked at him. "Why?" He put his hat on. "Because I was used," he said. "And I don't enjoy that." He walked back down the approach road. She watched him go. That's a surprise, she thought, but not really. Not entirely. Men like Silas Dre had their own codes. She didn't agree with the codes, wouldn't have written them. But the codes were real, and this particular code had just worked in her favor. She didn't trust it completely. But she didn't dismiss it either. Colonel Aldous Vane arrived 20 minutes later on horseback, with Silas behind him, and two of Silas's men flanking. Not an escort. A delivery. Vane understood this. It showed in his shoulders, in his hands on the reins. Too controlled. The specific overmanagement of a man who is frightened and has decided not to show it and is not entirely succeeding. 56. Distinguished, gray at the temples. The white gloves. Always the white gloves. The careful construction of a man who'd spent 30 years looking like someone who didn't do the things he did. He dismounted, looked up at Hester on the porch. She looked at him, here, after 12 years. Standing in the yard of a property she'd bought with cash she'd saved over 3 years of planning. The name at the top of her list. The man behind the men behind the men. The one she'd always known would be the hardest to reach. "Here, Mrs. Call." His voice was excellent. Trained over decades. A tool he'd sharpened and maintained. "I believe there may have been a significant misunderstanding about the nature of my interest in this property." She said nothing. He stepped forward, beginning the managed narrative that had carried him through 30 years of doing what he did. "I have considerable resources. Considerable connections at the federal level. Whatever you believe those files contain, I know what they contain," she said. "I wrote most of them." He stopped. "The Dunmore account records," she said. "The Holbrook payment schedule, the supply arrangements through Adobe Wells. The correspondence with 3 members of the Territorial Assembly," she looked at him. "And the affidavit from the Denton Creek investigation, the one that named you." The porch went very quiet. Vane's constructed surface cracked. Just slightly. The hairline fracture of something that had been under sustained pressure for a long time. "That investigation was closed," he said. "Inconclusive. It was closed because the lead investigator disappeared." She stood, came to the edge of the porch. I didn't disappear. I survived. I kept working. She came down the steps, onto the ground in front of him, closer than he wanted. For 12 years I kept working. Because inconclusive isn't the same as wrong. I have a great deal of patience. When I have sufficient reason, he looked at her, at the full weight of her, at the face like weathered limestone, at the woman who looked like the last person in the world you'd be afraid of, and had turned out to be the first. He reached into his coat. Reuben's gun cleared leather behind her. Silas's men moved on either side. Vane stopped, took his hand out. "Empty, a document," he said. "Regarding the legal title, too." "You don't have any documents that matter here," she said, "because nothing you filed is worth anything once Holbrook is removed from the bench." "Which is in process." She held his eyes. "And Holbrook is being removed, because his name is on page 7 of the Dunmore files with 4 specific payment dates that correspond exactly to 4 specific rulings." She stepped back. "It's over, Colonel." He looked at her for a long time, the surface held. "Barely. I'll contest every piece," he said. "Every document. Please," she said. "Contest it in open court. Stand in front of a federal judge and argue that those records are inaccurate. Say my name out loud in a courtroom and explain why a woman who spent 12 years building this case is wrong." She held his gaze steady. "I'll be there, with my ledger. And we'll see." The wind moved through the hollow. Somewhere on the ridge a bird called twice and went quiet. Vane looked down at the white gloves, at the impeccable whiteness of them. "You could have killed me," he said, very quietly. "When I dismounted? Yes. Why didn't you?" She looked at him. "Because you want that," she said. "You want to end here. Shot by the woman you wronged, in the field, with some kind of weight to it. That's the version that becomes a story. That's the version that makes you significant." She stepped back. "I'm not giving you that." She turned toward Reuben. "Deputy Marshal Ketch." Reuben came off the porch with the manacles. "I'm giving you a trial," she said. "Public. Every name read into the record. Every date. Every amount. You'll sit in a courtroom and hear what you did listed out loud, and you'll say yes or no to each item, and either way, it goes into the permanent record." She walked back toward the porch without looking at him. "And then you'll go to prison. And you'll grow old there, and in 20 years, when you die, the people who have to file the paperwork will have to look up your name to spell it correctly." The manacles clicked. Said nothing, because she'd taken everything he might have said and reduced it, made it smaller than he'd needed it to be. That couldn't be undone with words, because words were the tool he was best at, and she'd just demonstrated she was better with them than he was. She went back inside. Reuben handled the rest. Fletcher Dray left Caldwell Crossing that evening, quickly. No confrontation. Silas let him go without explanation, and Hester didn't ask, because some things are between brothers and don't belong to anyone else. Cord Dray came to the property the next morning, on foot, hat in his hands. The young man who'd been terrified for 6 months arriving at the other side of that terror, and not entirely sure what to do without it. He stood in the yard. Hester came out on the porch. They looked at each other across the yard. "I don't know what happens to me now," he said. "Reuben will explain the federal arrangement. That's his decision, not mine." He nodded. "Looked at the ground. What you provided," she said. "It saved this property. Probably some lives." She looked at him. "I'm not the one who decides your legal situation, for whatever it's worth. You did the right thing. Late. Scared. Imperfectly." She paused. "But you did it." He looked up. 29 years old and looking it. Young in a way that the last 6 months had stressed but not broken. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Go talk to Reuben. He went. She watched him go. Late and scared and imperfectly, she thought. Like everyone. Like me. Gideon Webb came on Sunday. She opened the door before he'd finished knocking. He stood on the porch. The same posture as before. Hat in hands. The dignity deficit. But something different in his face. The particular look of a man who'd made a decision he'd been avoiding and was living on the other side of it. I heard it worked, he said. That? Vain? Yes. And the files? Yes. He looked at her. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't. Come in, she said. He sat at the kitchen table. Didn't touch the coffee this time either. Some habits die hard, and some habits are about what you feel you deserve. I'm not going to tell you. It didn't matter, she said. What you gave them. The routes. The tunnel. If I hadn't known what I was walking into, she stopped. Let that sit. It would have gone differently. He looked at his hands. But you came back, she said. You didn't have to. Nobody forced you. You came back and you told me about the tunnel. It doesn't make up for. No, she said. It doesn't. That's not how these things work. There's no arithmetic that makes the original decision acceptable. She wrapped her hands around her cup. But it changed the outcome. That matters. She looked at him. That's all I have to say about it. He was quiet for a while. What happens now? He said. To you, she looked at the kitchen window. The approach road visible in the Sunday morning light. The ridge going red in the early sun. I stay, she said. He looked surprised. After all this is my property. I chose it deliberately. I learned every inch of it. I built something here. She looked at him. I'm not leaving it because people came and tried to take it. That would be a strange reason to leave. He almost smiled. The east barn, he said, support beam on the south side. I know about it. I could help. If you wanted, he looked at his coffee. I know this land. The quirks of it. Where the water goes after hard rain. Where the fence posts go soft in summer. She looked at him. I don't need a ranch hand, she said. No, I know, but she picked up her cup. Someone who knows where the water goes might be useful. He was quiet, then nodded. Once. Small. Coffee was hot and the morning was still, and outside the ridge sat in the early light. The way it had always sat, and would continue to sit regardless of what happened in the hollow beneath it. Marshal Dorothea Sykes rode in on a Monday, 6 days after she should have. 2 days after everything was over. Big roan horse. Federal duster gray with trail dust. The face of a woman who'd ridden very hard for a very long time and had arrived to find the occasion had passed without her. She tied her horse. Came up to the porch. Looked at Hester. Hester looked at her. I missed it, Dot said. You did. How bad? Not bad. Good, actually. Dot looked at the property. The repaired barn wall. The approach road. The ridge. The hollow. You did it without me, she said. Yes. A pause. Good, said, and meant it completely. The way partners mean things when the partnership is old enough to be beyond ego. She sat in the chair that had been empty every morning for 3 weeks. Hester poured coffee. Handed her a cup. They sat. The way people sit when the silence between them is full rather than empty. Vane's in custody, Dot said. I know, Holbrook is being removed. Federal committee met Thursday. Reuben told me. 3 other names on that list have already requested hearings. Once the first domino, I know how it goes. Hester looked at the approach road. I've watched it go before, 12 years ago. Yes. Dot was quiet for a moment. Denton Creek. She said, yes, you should have called me when you disappeared. I know, Hester. I know, Dot, gently, but closed. The way you close things that are finished rather than things that are still painful. I know I should have. I wasn't ready to be someone who could be helped. I had to be angry for a while first. Dot looked at her. How long is a while? Apparently 12 years. Dot almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough to count. The wind came off the ridge. The first truly warm wind of the spring, carrying cedar and dry grass, and the distant smell of the river. Texas deciding, finally, to stop pretending it was still winter. What are you going to do with the land? Dot asked. Ranch it. Really? I bought cattle. 40 head. Coming from Amarillo in 3 weeks, Hester picked up her coffee. I'm going to ranch it. Gideon Webb is going to tell me where the water goes after hard rain. Odette Price is going to continue being the most attentive woman in the Panhandle. Reuben is going to figure out what to do with himself in Tascosa. Dot looked at her. And you, she said. Hester was quiet. The approach road empty in the morning light. The ridge red and still, hollow, holding the sound of 2 women breathing. And the wind coming off the rock. I'm going to sit on this porch, she said, and drink this coffee and watch that road. She looked at it for the first time in 12 years. Not because I'm watching for something coming, Dot waited, just because it's a nice road, Hester said. And it's my road. And I can watch it if I want. Dot looked at the road. The roan horse moved slightly at the post. Settled, it is a nice road, she said. It is. They drank their coffee. The morning went long and warm and unhurried around them. 3 months later, a letter came from the federal clerk's office in Tascosa. Vane had entered a plea. All counts, the trial was set for September. In public, in a full courthouse with a federal judge brought in from Austin specifically to ensure no local interference of any kind. Every name on the Dunmore list would be read into the public record. Every date, every amount, every transaction. Hester read the letter at the kitchen table, folded it, set it beside the empty iron box, which she'd kept. For a reason she didn't explain to anyone, because the reason was more true than any words she'd found for it. She went out on the porch, sat down, looked at the road. James, she thought, they're going to say the names, out loud, in a courtroom. Everything we wrote down, everything we documented, it's going to matter. It took too long. I know. I'm sorry it took this long. It's going to matter. The wind came off the ridge. Warm now, reliably warm. The Panhandle spring having finally committed, she sat with it, the weight of it, and the relief of it, and the strange particular feeling of finishing. Something you've carried so long you'd forgotten what you felt like before you were carrying it. Not empty. Different. Lighter in a way that was also fuller, like a room where someone has finally put the furniture in the right places. Nothing removed. Just arranged the way it was always supposed to be arranged. Gideon Webb came around the corner of the barn, called something to her about the east fence. She called something back. He went to work. The cattle would come from Amarillo next week. Odette was coming to dinner Thursday. Reuben had accepted the position in Tascosa, 60 miles away. Not close, not gone. The ridge sat in the afternoon light, red and permanent, the way it had sat before she arrived, and would sit long after she was done with her portion of things. She picked up her coffee, drank it, watched the road. Just because she came to bury herself, and found, instead, that she was exactly what this land needed, which, in the end, is all any of us can hope for.